Thanks very much for staying with us. Time now for Eye on Africa with me, Georgia Calvin-Smith. Tonight, trafficked from Djibouti, forced into domestic work, but eventually becoming one of Britain's athletic superstars. Olympic great Mo Farah speaks out about his turbulent childhood. Also, a devastating combination of rising food costs, prolonged conflict and climate change has left hundreds of millions of people, many in parts of Africa, facing a severe food crisis. The International Committee of the Red Cross says that the window of time left to act is closing. And more than 4 million people in Niger can't count on their next meal. Communities there are ramping up training in farming and food processing, hoping to take more of a lead in the on-the-ground response to the country's food crisis. But first, British Olympic icon Mo Farah has revealed that his real name is Hussein Abdi Kahin and that was changed after he was trafficked from Djibouti to the UK as a child. The four-time Olympic gold medalist, who received a knighthood in 2017, says that his original family was torn apart by Somalia's civil war.
Mo Farah has become a household name. A four-time gold medalist, Farah is one of the greatest long-distance runners in Olympic history. But away from the track, he's been hiding a dark secret. And he's finally decided to reveal it in a BBC documentary to be aired this week.
The truth is, I'm not who you think I am. The real story is I was born in Somaliland, north of Somalia, as Hussein Abdi Kahin.
The man who would go on to dazzle the world of long-distance running grew up surrounded by civil war. His family was torn apart. When he was just 4, his dad was killed by a stray bullet. Then, at the age of 9, he travelled to the UK with a woman he'd never met before.
I was separated from my mother and I was brought into the UK illegally under the name of another child called Mohammed Farah. I had all the contact details for my relative, and once we got to her house, the lady took it off me and right in front of me ripped them up and put it in the bin.
After initially thinking he'd be living with relatives, the young Farah was instead forced to work as a domestic servant. Years later, he confided in a PE teacher who told social services. Farah was placed in the care of a Somali foster family, and he says from that moment on, things only got better. The athlete says it was running that saved him. He hopes that by telling his story, other victims of trafficking will know they're not alone.
Now, the war in Ukraine has deepened a food emergency that's affecting a staggering 346 million people in parts of Africa. The International Committee of the Red Cross has warned that the insecurity is hitting those who were already in a precarious situation the worst, and that without concerted international work, there will be an irreversible humanitarian crisis with an unimaginable human cost. Earlier, I spoke to the ICRC's Africa director about the scale of the emergency.
Wars and violence, but also climate shocks, are clearly the main drivers of food insecurity today in Africa. And these heartbreaking situations cause major displacement of people, loss of livelihoods. Farmers cannot even plant their crops. So with over 35 wars happening today in Africa and over 30 million people uprooted from their homes, countries in the Horn of Africa, for example, like Somalia or Sudan, which highly depend on the imports of grains, but also others like Mali or Burkina Faso in the Sahel and the Lake Chad region, as well as the DRC, are today clearly the most and severely affected by the crisis.
So there you outlined some of the main drivers of the crisis, conflict, climate change, the shock to wheat supplies caused by the war in Ukraine. How do all these different causes affect the response options available to you?
Well, first and foremost, they affect the people that have no access to essential services, no access to healthcare services and other forms of support that they require to remain afloat, to remain with dignity and live with the current circumstances. And indeed, this does put a lot of pressure on all the volunteers of the Red Cross and Red Crescent teams that are deployed today all across African countries and trying to help and support. And with a global order that is indeed hard hit by different crises, including an inflation that will reach, according to IMF, over 12% in 2022, we are up for a very difficult period ahead.
So aid agencies are doing what they can to try and tackle the very kind of immediate food shortages. But is there anything that can be done in terms of preventing the crises like conflict or even some of the food shocks that we've seen caused by the war in Ukraine, prevent that leading to food security crises that we're seeing at the moment?
So for sure, when we're faced with a crisis of such magnitude, and again, a world order which is highly impacted by a sharp increase of fuel prices, fertilizers, and so on, we must indeed collectively look at the root causes of what are the main drivers and how to tackle them. Work, for example, on reinforcing food systems, food production, have climate-sensitive farming, include climate financing and climate adaptation measures for not only farmers, but also the ministries and the authorities involved. And for those to be tackled in seriousness, I think we must work hand in hand with states, with the African Union, which has its theme of the year, food security, with international financial institutions, research institutes, and work also hand in hand with those suffering who really know best. And I think that last part is an essential ingredient to find long-lasting African solutions and prevent this from happening with such a magnitude. We know that this will happen again, but the impact that we see today is simply leading to irreversible trends that we'll only regret if we don't tackle this head on.
Patrick Youssef, the ICRC's Africa Director there. Now, more than 4 million people face food insecurity in Niger, as well as the crucial work being done by aid agencies in terms of getting more food to those who need it. Communities on the front line of the crisis are learning new ways to process and grow crops. Our team reports.
A factory and a few hands working in the face of a food crisis. In Tahua, these women help transform millet into fortified flour for infants. They are doing what they can to boost local children's food security.
This flour has a lot of benefits, mainly for children, because it provides a lot of vitamins. That's why we make it. And because it is made of local products, it is very nutritious.
With support from the World Food Programme, the factory also doubles as a training center. The workers produce 2 tons of flour per week. Several WFP staff help oversee operations. Madenia Abarchi is in charge of the site and hopes that the women will soon be able to run the unit by themselves.
If the women here improve their skills, if they are trained properly, I believe they can take over.
120 kilometers away from Tahua, near the village of Fuchi, another food security program is underway. Salifou Nassirou trains rural communities in off-season farming. Here, climate change is the biggest challenge.
We had a lot of losses during the wet season due to the lack of rain. And because of insects and locust invasions, off-season farming relieves the farmers a bit, but the crops here are to be eaten and not sold.
In June 2022, 4 million people were affected across Niger as food insecurity peaked. The World Food Programme lacks proper funding to cope and warns that it needs at least $46 million to bridge the hunger gap.
Look now at some news in brief. The highest-ranking Rwandan to face trial in France over the 1994 genocide of Tutsis and moderate Hutus in Rwanda has been jailed for 20 years. 78-year-old Laurent Bussier-Baruta was acquitted as a perpetrator but found guilty of complicity in the mass killings in which more than 800,000 victims were slaughtered in just 100 days. The former prefect of Gikongoro province was accused of having persuaded thousands to take refuge in a school just days before tens of thousands were killed there in one of the genocide's bloodiest episodes. The preliminary findings of an autopsy carried out in Spain on the body of a former Angolan president has found that he died of natural causes. Further tests still have to be done. 79-year-old Jose Eduardo dos Santos ruled his country from 1979 to 2017. He died last Friday in a hospital in Barcelona, and his daughter requested a post-mortem alleging that he'd been murdered. DR Congo is now an official member of the East African Community. A delegation headed to the EAC's headquarters in Arusha, Tanzania this week to formally present documents that complete the final step in joining the bloc. Becoming the 7th member of the EAC means DR Congolese nationals will be able to move between other partner states without visas, and that there'll be free movement of goods. The regional integration of the vast country could give an important economic boost to the bloc. Now, in Malawi, 250 elephants are being driven across the country to be set up in new digs. They're heading from Liwonde to the much larger Kasungu National Park. But villagers at the beasts' old home are glad to see them go, whilst their arrival at their new community has some there worried. Kamina Dlek has the story.
This is not your average commute. Ahead of their long journey, these elephants in Malawi must be tranquilized before being transferred to a waiting truck. Some 250 elephants over the course of several weeks will be relocated from the Liwonde National Park in the southeast of Malawi to Kasungu National Park, several hundred kilometers away.
We want to reduce the population of elephants in this park, in Liwonde National Park, because currently we have 600 plus elephants in this park. We would be comfortable, ecologically speaking, that is, to have 300 elephants in this park.
This government initiative aims to reduce the number of, at times, lethal confrontations between animal and man. The elephants will have more space in their new habitat, so they won't need to go looking in surrounding settlements for food. The local community near Liwonde is relieved to see the back of them.
I am happy that some elephants are being taken away because some strayed into our gardens and damaged our crops, as there were too many.
But despite a fence and tracking system, villagers near Kasungu are concerned. These newcomers will more than triple the local elephant population almost overnight. The park had around 1,200 elephants in the 1970s, and even with conservation efforts, it currently only has around 120.
Well, that's it for Eye on Africa. Thanks for joining us. Do so again. Take care.